Okay, hopefully this is working better. Okay. It is not. Okay, I'm going to hope that this is still updating. That's frustrating. Okay, anyway, I'm sorry. I'm just making sure that the little video capture thing I'm doing here is not showing the screen updating as I move it. So this video may be useless by the time it's over with. We'll find out. So we have pose A, pose B. This is 50% in between those two poses. This is what Maya would give us by default, right? And that's not very good, right? If we were analyzing poses the way we were analyzing poses on day 1 or day 2, whatever, right? We could find all sorts of things that are ugly about this pose. Right, there's no, like the contrapposto is kind of boring, the line of action is boring, the silhouette has some issues, but mainly the question is, what is this character doing? Like, tell me something about this character's personality. Yes, like it's very, he's what? Mannequin? So there's nothing in it that really makes this have any appeal. Right, which is an important part of the 12 principles. So that's what happens when we let a machine make our decisions for us. What we're going to look at, so what I've done is I've gone through and made a whole bunch of different breakdowns that hopefully will give you some examples of how we can push this. So that's just a 50% breakdown. That's what Maya will give you automatically. We can make more creative decisions on our breakdowns. There we go. So if I decide to push the character down a little bit, what I'm getting in this motion now is a head dip, right? I'm putting some arcs in there. I made a decision to make that transition different, right? So imagine the character's looking from left to right. This is kind of like a simple take, right? Like the character's like kind of like, what? You know, like kind of dips down, closes his eyes. It's going to give us a more appealing arc in the motion, and just frankly, this pose is a little more interesting, right? So the thing to remember about this is that breakdowns are completely up to you. Anybody else still needing to sign that? If anybody else needs to sign the attendance sheet, Brant has it. So we could choose a completely different option, right? Maybe the person who you're talking to somebody on your left and somebody to the left, and somebody on your right is trying to get your attention, and you're frustrated, and you're like, what? Right? That's a different arc. That's a different transition. What? Right? So the breakdown is the only thing different here. How we transition from pose A to pose B is still in your creative control, right? You still get to make creative decisions here. I think it's important, like for me to remember this, is like this is still the fun part. Like you're going to get into the graph editor, it's not always as fun. Sometimes it's a little repetitive, stuff like that. This is still the parts where you're getting to make creative decisions on how to improve this animation. So I made another breakdown from this one to this to this. So what I've done here is I actually just favored the first pose. Now, so pose A, my breakdown is still pretty close to pose A, right? And then pose B is way further away from my breakdown. What is that going to do to the way that motion happens? Huh? It's going to feel snappy. It's going to feel like I'm easing out of that first pose and going into my second pose faster, right? So my breakdown doesn't just give me control over the shape of the pose or the angle of the whatever the orientation of the character. It gives me some control over my timing and my spacing, right? My easing in and out. So just by having a breakdown pose that favors a previous pose, it's going to make it feel like I'm easing out of that first pose. Or if I was favoring the later pose, it would make it feel like I come out of this one quick and ease into that second one, right? So a breakdown gives us the ability to do that as well. A breakdown also gives us some options to add overlapping action into the pose, right? So you remember the pendulum? You all remember the pendulum, right? You had to offset stuff in the timeline to get some overlapping action, but that's not the only way to get overlapping action. An element of overlapping action is drag, right? As I start to trying to find something here. This bag will work, I'm sure. As I start to pull it from one side to the other, the tip of the bag drags behind, right? And so I can just build some of that drag and elements of the character moving at different times into my breakdown, right? So if this is pose A, my breakdown, I can have the head and the arms dragging behind and then catching up later, right? And so I can use it to adjust the character's pose. I can use it to adjust timing and spacing. I can use it to add in overlapping action, right? And it's important to remember that it's not just like you get one breakdown between every keyframe. You can break this down as much as you want. Literally, if we think about it, you could break this down to every frame, right? You could go all the way down to where you are deciding what happens on all 400 frames of this animation. Every frame, you made a decision on exactly what that key pose is, just by slicing it in half over and over again. Interestingly, I actually think a simplified version of that is kind of how they got the effect they did on Spider-Verse. Like, anybody watch Spider-Verse? I finally watched it. I'm very excited about it. So it's still fresh in my brain. I know that not everybody is still on Facebook. Apparently that's just an old man thing to do now, is to be on Facebook. But I am, and I'm not an old man, am I? I'm joking. No, I will say the only reason I mention Facebook is because I've never seen this in a different spot. And if you are on it or just want to search this, I think it's open. I don't think you have to sign up and anything for it. But it's a group called Frame by Frame, where they analyze, let me refresh it, I watched it in the last class, where they analyze animations frame by frame, right? And so let's watch this one as an example. They watch the entire clip, and then they break it down frame by frame. And the interesting thing about the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is that it's animated on tubes, right? That means that in traditional animation, you would draw an image, like for 24 frames of animation, you wouldn't want to draw all 24 images just because that's too many drawings, right? It's too much work. So people realized that you could very easily draw 12 drawings and hold each drawing for 2 frames. That's what's happening on this, which means that they're being, like they have a keyframe every 2 frames on this. And you'll notice each frame is held for 2 frames at least. Sometimes it's even down to like 4s. And that means every image is super important, right? That's why this is so good, is because I think that they broke this down probably almost all the way onto tubes. And then they just set it to steps mode, the way we're animating right now. So if you have a keyframe every 2 frames and you set it to steps mode, then you have this effect. But that means like each of these poses, I don't get 2 images for it. I only get 12 images in a second of animation to be able to communicate this, right? So each of them are very important. And that means she's also probably traveling slightly larger distances frame per frame. Another interesting element to this, though, is you'll notice that the background is not moving on 2s. The background's moving on 1s, which gives a snappy motion to the animation. It's interesting to sort of note this because it's currently relevant to the animation world, because everybody just like looked up from their desk in the animation world and went, what? And when this came out, right? And I have a feeling you're going to see a lot of copycats in the near future. So again, just to kind of look at it,
weird
like
thing happened.
really take like this is a great
And I mean, like,
website.
really weird.
If you're not on Facebook, look it up and watch this because they analyze and break this stuff down, and you'll start to see all of that elements we were talking about: line of action, arcs, silhouette, clear silhouettes. I love that right there, like all those lines of action that you can just show. Like that's one image, and any image in this you could pause, print out, and frame, right? That's composed that well, right? And you should be, like, that's how you should be thinking of your animation. Every image needs to communicate as a standalone thing. This breakdown is just getting us closer to being on 2s or being on 1s, right? Of having complete control of it.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Her hand's closed, and the very next frame it's open.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's...
And that's why it feels like this snappy instant that's happening. Check out, like, this is the part that I think is really impressive. As she hits the wall, watch the spacing. It happens over one frame, so you get this really big exaggerated stretch, and then over one frame, she's on the wall, right? So that makes it have a lot of impact, a lot of energy to it.
You can only get away with that with only certain animations, right? Like, if you get away with, like,
To this level of exaggeration, yes. And I think it's also important to recognize that this is extremely exaggerated, but that doesn't make it cartoony, right? I think that that's a good reason to distinguish between this. Like, her poses are, like, the way she bent her hand was way more exaggerated than probably she would need to actually grasp that. Yeah, and so I think it works because they pushed the exaggeration in this motion. But yeah, I mean, the principles that are involved in making that read, because of that big stretch and then the snap frame, those principles still work in other styles of animation too. So all right.
if they weren't, sorry, if
No, you're
they
cool.
weren't as exaggerated, like this, one of the walks that I'm working on, I realized if I spread the feet further apart, like almost I would need less keyframes than if I were to just do this for some reason. Because it would, like, this wouldn't read as well unless I had more frames.
Mm-hmm.
But this would, I don't know if that makes sense. But does that, like, I think that's kind of like...
Yeah, I mean, it's the timing and spacing. It's moving a smaller distance, so you probably need more. Yeah, I can see kind of what you're talking about. Okay, so again, like, recognize that every pose is important, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. So how many times we break this down is up to you based off of two things. How much information do you still need before this motion is clear? And sort of what's your preference of working? Some people like to break their shots down to have more frames in them, more breakdowns in them, and then they do a little less work in the graph editor. Some people don't break it down as much because they're really comfortable in the graph editor and that just makes sense to them. I am sort of in the middle. I have a tendency to break mine down probably to somewhere between every 5 to 10 frames I have a breakdown key. Unless there's a big rest, like somebody's just standing there like breathing, then it may be longer because I feel like I can pull off more of that in the graph editor. So again, these breakdowns, again from pose A, we can have multiples. We can go from here to a drag pose where the hands are dragging, the head is dragging, but the hips are leading. So it feels like the hips are leading the character forward, dragging the rest of this down. And then we get this dip to make a cleaner arc before we get up to our last pose. Again, we're kind of pushing the exaggeration a little bit. Another one, starting with our pose A. Pose B, check that out. That's almost all of the characters stayed almost the same, right? We have from here to here. So when we're talking about lead and follow, in the previous one, the hips were leading that motion. It felt like the hips were pulling the character forward. Now it feels like the character's face is what's pulling them forward. They're talking to somebody over here, and then they hear the voice of somebody they have a crush on who just walked through the door, right? And that might be like, I don't care what you're saying. What? Like your head turns, right? And I know that sounds silly, but you can actually think of this of like what made them turn, right? And it was their brain, right? Their brain made them turn, so they're like, the head goes first. Versus like a more instinctual thing, maybe like reflexes made you turn, like they're bothering me, what, right? Like it may be that you like lose control and it's almost like your body drags your head along with it. This is really subtle. Just having the head starting to turn first implies that the character is thinking about whatever is to the right. And so I'm still continuing to drag things behind. So starting with the head, the arm and the hips barely move. And then the hand is still dragging behind before we get to this end pose. Right? And so these breakdowns are really just us having creative control of how that change happens. Again, we could really exaggerate the opposite of that, of like the almost like your hips are dragging you across, like your lower body starts first and your head is dragging behind. Now keep in mind that a breakdown doesn't have to be just on the timeline, it has to be in between pose A and B to be a breakdown of pose A and B. But you can go past the location of pose B, right? So this is called overshoot. When you have let's say you have your arm up in the air and you're going to take it straight down to the side, like it's like a sort of a chop down to the side. Notice what happens when you try to stop it suddenly is your arm goes past that point and then comes back. We call that overshoot. It's an element of overlapping action and follow through. But that overshoot is our muscles trying to stop our arm moving down, but momentum still carried it a little further. And so we get that a lot, where you shoot past it and come back. Actually, there's only really 3 ways something can stop, right? Or something can make that change. Like our bouncing ball, the object is traveling in one direction, it comes in contact with another force, and so it changes directions, right? That's one. The other one is this overshoot. If it doesn't come in contact with anything, I'm just trying to stop it, and it's moving fast, it will go past that point and come back. The other option is I am trying to stop it very precisely, so I ease that motion in, okay? All 3 of those have to be animator controlled. Maya doesn't understand any of that, right? It's just a hammer, right? Like it's a tool. So what I've done here is we get this drag here, and then overshoot, and then we come back to pose B. And that's going to make it feel like we sort of shot past that, right? And it gets this like springiness to it. Again, like we can subdivide this as many times as we want. I have 4 breakdowns in between this. We get this drag at the beginning, right? A big dip here. I'm going to overshoot in the side-to-side direction, so it goes further. Then I'll overshoot in the up direction, and then we kind of settle back to here. And what that allowed me to do is build a pretty smooth arc with my character's head and a little bit of springiness at the end. Right? So again, you are crafting this. Don't let Maya try to do this for you. I guarantee you it'll do a poorer job. And again, we can subdivide this as many times as we want to, and we can be creative about this. Like if we're wanting to be really exaggerated, again, still the same key poses, we can have this drag upwards to get the head to kind of go in an interesting arc, a dip down, overshoot, or I'm really exaggerating it to the side, big overshoot up, and then settle back to here, right? Any of those that we want to do, we can do that with breakdowns, right? So this is the unfortunately I feel like this is the part that people phone in. They're like, I already did some good strong key poses, now I just gotta do a little bit of breakdowns or something and I'll be done, right? So what I've done is I've done my breakdown pass in a video. So if you watched the previous videos, it's in the same location, ETSU E3, DIGM classes. You're welcome to pull these up to character animation, resources, and it's to breakdown time lapse. So you'll recall, this is where we left off last class period. This is the flip in step mode just my blocking keys, okay? Again, just a reminder, the reason we keep this in step is because this feels on a foundational level, it feels successful, right? If I were watching this with Maya already doing the transitions for me, it doesn't. It feels broken, and this feels like a disappointment. If I'm like, I worked 6 hours and that's what I have, right? Like that's not, that's hard to keep going after that. So don't do it. Don't worry about those transitions that Maya is giving you. They're all wrong. We have to trust the process. And the process is putting in these breakdowns next, okay? So this is about an hour's worth of work. I'm going to stop it a little bit, of me starting to add in those breakdowns. So the first thing I really started doing was adding in the breakdowns for the run. Now, I didn't break it all the way down to contact down, passing it up, but I did add some additional poses. Before I go too far, I want to talk about this little thing in the bottom corner here, right? This Tween Machine version 3. I'm going to show you how to install that here in a minute and show you how to use it. But this is a tool that I'm using that allows me to stay in step mode and get some breakdowns that are useful. It saves you probably like a handful of clicks per breakdown, but it's a really nice tool once you start using it, or once you start using the breakdown method here to do it. So,
is it charging now?
this is a different one. This is a free one. I think it's released as open source, so it'll always be free. Animbot is charging. Totally worth it. I think it's like $9 a month, and I totally subscribe to it. I would pay, I'm just glad he didn't say $30 a month, because I really didn't want to have to pay $30 a month, but I would totally pay $30 a month. So I'm trying to click on my timeline. That's funny. So there is a version of it. I think it's $4 a month, though, if you want to use that one. So kind of watch what I'm doing. It is not a breakdown pose is not, or a breakdown pose is not a second class pose. Like, you still need to be thinking of all of the same things. You may have noticed here, like, I'm trying to get negative space in between her elbow and her back, right? Everything that I was worried about in my key poses, I'm worried about here. I'm even making breakdown poses for the parts where she's off screen. And the reason for that is because it's all about those transitions, right? And if she's not transitioning on screen correctly, it just won't have the right momentum. So I'm even setting some keys off screen to make sure it moves correctly. Again, you'll notice constantly making sure everything is correct. I adjust the fingers, I'm adjusting the silhouette. But in the process of making these breakdown keys, I'm going to start to notice that my key poses, my original key poses, aren't perfect, right? The way I'm doing this, and you'll kind of watch, I'm using the greater than, less than keys to step through, like I was just now stepping through in Maya. Pose A, my breakdown, pose B. Pose A, my breakdown, pose B. And I get to see like a progression then. It's like a flip book of those three images. And I can tell if that's flowing correctly, right? And so I'm doing that a lot. I pretty much keep my hand on the greater than, less than keys throughout this whole process. And again, like little things, like I am literally in this breakdown trying to make sure her fingers have a good silhouette. I think it's important to recognize that these poses, again, these poses carry a lot of character in them. Look how much she bends her knee up in this motion, right? She's practically kicking herself in the butt, right? I'm pulling that from the reference. He's doing that because he's a little guy. He's got to get up that tree, right? He's building up that anticipation. And I would not have noticed that, or I would not have put that in like that if I had not been looking at the reference, right? So again, reference is really not optional. Like this is really important part of this. Again, it's probably also important to be tumbling around in your perspective viewport to make sure that even though we're going to be seeing it from our camera, I want to make sure that it is physically possible. Whatever I'm having her do is not just like yeah, it looks good from our camera, but from this other angle is physically impossible. But the blocking pass of this, even though I put in probably just as many keyframes, the blocking pass, I was kind of having to craft every one of those key poses from scratch, right? I was getting a little bit of stuff for free, but a lot of stuff was coming from scratch. And so I probably had, I don't know, 15 to 20 key poses, and it took me about 6 hours. To get another 15 to 20 breakdowns took me an hour. Right? So this process is faster, especially using this tool, because my blocking pass is already solid. If your blocking pass is not solid, don't move on to this stage yet. Again, I'm finding things that are important with this action, right? I'm pulling information from the reference, and what I noticed that she does, or what I noticed that he does in the reference, is he pulls his arms back and he throws them back really far because he has to throw them forward again. And that throwing them forward is where he's getting this angular momentum to get that rotation. And so a lot of this is really small transition stuff. Like, how does his arms go from this one pointing forward to being up in that air above his head, right? Just like that arm motion, I had to find an appealing way to make that happen. And that's what you're seeing me do right there. Again, clearing out these silhouettes. And so this is where you can see kind of doing this like hand throwing forward thing. It's also interesting because it's kind of also where she squashes down before the push off. And I'm seeing little things like as she throws her hands forward, it changes her center of rotation. Right? She does not turn a flip rotating from a pivot point of the hips. The pivot point she rotates around is this invisible dot that's floating out in front of her chest, right? That's kind of what's happening because it's got multiple forces happening. And again, this is stuff that I never could guess, right? I have to pull from the reference. I use the reference all the way up to the, yeah, you can kind of see that, like how her chest almost stays in the same spot, but her back part, her legs and hips travel upward. And that's sort of like that countering force of her throwing her arms forward. It's important to use all of the rig. There's a couple of spots in here in this flip, I think it is, where I needed to tuck her in more, right? So I scaled in, or I moved her chest top control to sort of squash that a little bit. And then I scaled the length of her neck, right? Just because it's a possibility. Whatever you can use to make these poses look correct is important. But again, all I'm doing is subdividing what was already there. Some of this information, there's a big gap there, but I don't see any additional information I need in that breakdown. And so I'm deciding to defer until I get to the graph editor for that. Now, I want to show you this part. I'll back up just a little bit. She hits the ground, right? But that's a lot of forward momentum, right? She's moving forward. I wanted to build in some overshoot into that next pose. So this tool that I'm using here, this tween machine, the way it works is if you slide it all the way to the left, right? Then you get 100% in your breakdown key. It creates a new key for you, and it gives you exactly the key you had to the left of that breakdown key, right? The previous key. It gives you 100% of that. If you slide it all the way to the right, it gives you 100% of your next key. If you slide it somewhere in the middle, it gives you a percentage of each of them. So the cool thing about that is I can also turn on an option that gives me overshoot, which means it will give me 110% or 120% of one of those keys. So that's what I'm actually going to use here in a few minutes. You'll see I'll change this and get 110% of this. But what I'm trying to build in here is some overshoot from that impact. I want her to hit the ground, and then I want her to continue going forward a little bit as she recoils, right? And so you'll kind of see that. You're going to see from there to there to there, right? Now, the next thing I want her to do is that big like up and then back thing that she does. So I put another breakdown pose in there to really push that like transition in there, right? The back pose will feel stronger if she's really dragging behind. So I'm trying to drag her arms, trying to drag a whole bunch of stuff to make that look better. You can kind of see I do some stuff with the arms. Yeah, here's where I'm scaling some of the neck. Right. So that feels a little exaggerated when you pause on it, but it makes sense. Now here's where I think I do the overshoot. So I set this to do 110% of her settled back pose, and that's going to give her this, like, her arms go back a little further, and she overshoots that last pose and kind of comes back to it. The last little bit of stuff that I do here is you'll see I have that big empty section at the end there, and that's where she's just going to be kind of standing there like out of breath, like she just did a backflip or just did a flip, right? Like she's ready to fight, and she's a little bit out of breath, and so I'm just going to kind of be like a little bit of a breathe cycle there at the end to show that she's like angry. So I don't need quite as many keyframes in there to pull that off. All right, so that was the video of it. This is where I am now on that process. So in the stepped mode, this is where I am after the breakdowns. So I didn't count the poses. I'm guessing I'm probably getting close to like 25, 30, something like that, maybe a little bit more. There's a lot of keys in here considering this is only 100 frames long, right? However, I want to point out to you that, like, again, I'm happy with this. After watching the Spider-Verse clip, I still feel like, oh, it could be better, but and I probably will push it more. I actually end up pushing a little bit in the splining pass, but I'm pretty happy with where this is at right now. It's got all of the elements I need in there. The only thing I may actually add a little bit more in terms of keying is I kind of feel like it needs a little bit more on that run, like a little bit more like with the down pose or something like that to make it clear, right? I may also push the face just a little bit more. So when I watch it in steps, I'm okay with it. The next part of this process is going to be taking this into the graph editor, setting it to spline, right? And when I do that, it's going to break it, right? And we're getting to that point now where I can start worrying about this, like where I can actually deal with this. I have enough things set in stone now that I can start to fix these things that are broken. That's what the graph editor is for. The interesting thing is probably the biggest offenders on this, I'm going to be able to fix in like 15, 20 seconds, right? It's actually just an interpolation error, right? That weird flip thing she does, that's not something I've done wrong. That's something that Maya has interpreted wrong. But again, this is why I work in step mode, because this feels like a failure. The step mode felt like a success, right? And I think you need to kind of keep reminding yourself of that. I know it's a couple of extra clicks to make it happen, but it's worth it. And it allows me to only think about those poses. And we're still in that mindset, or we're still in that phase of this. We're still only thinking about the poses. So that's what we're going to do next class period. Is I'm going to do the walkthrough of all of the splining process. I think that this will work best if you're kind of following along to this point, not like clicking through and doing it while I'm doing it. More like if you come into class on Tuesday with all of your breakdowns in place, you'll be able to be in the headspace of like, okay, I'm ready to go into the graph editor. Let's talk about the graph editor. If you're still like in your blocking pass, you're just not going to be able to do that and comprehend what we're doing in here at the same time. So I would say spend the weekend trying to get up to that point where you have your breakdowns in there. I'm giving us a little bit of extra time at the end just for the polish pass. So any questions? So the last thing I want to talk about is that tool, the tween machine. So you can find it just by Googling tween machine. Let's do it here. And it's going to take you to this Justin S. Barrett's website. That's him. And he's the guy who originally made it. There we go. He's the guy who originally made it. There's options in this that really help.
Well, that's new.
Yeah, where you can add the different sections to it. So there's options in this that are helpful, where you can have pre-selected things. But having said that, this is he stopped developing it, made it open source. Somebody else is maintaining it. So you can find this through GitHub. But once you get to GitHub, you need to go to the releases. This is sort of the uncompiled version of it, or the unready to use version. So under releases, just download this source code zip here. You'll actually notice that up on the network under resources, I've already put it up there for you. So let's talk about how to install this. If you've never installed a plugin before, usually the best thing to do is find some instructions. So they're actually here. They're not under the release tab, but if you go back one to this one, he explains how to install it. So you're going to put that file under your Maya version number scripts. So if we go in here to your documents folder, Maya 2018 scripts, you'll see I already put it in there. It's tween machine Python. He also has an icon in here that you would put under Maya version number prefs icons. Right there. And that's actually just beneficial so you can know what that button is. Inside of Maya, once we put that in those folders, if we start Maya back up, the way we launch that is just to type this little, actually probably paste this section here. And he has it listed in the GitHub. It says import tween machine start, those parentheses, right? We're going to type that into the Python editor here and hit Control Enter, and it'll open the tween machine, right? So the tween machine is starting it is literally just this. So if you want to put this in a tab, all you got to do is drag that up to here. This is the Python script. Right click, go to Edit, and under Shelves, you can pick that new icon right there. And so now I have a tween machine button, right? And so that's how you install it. It will work on anything you have selected that has keyframes on it. So I've already made a button that selects my entire character. And so I can use this now to start making breakdowns for my pose, right? If I go here to frame, here to the end, we can kind of see this. I'll separate these a little bit more. Right. So I have pose A, pose B. I break open the tween machine. If I want a breakdown pose in between, all I have to do is grab this and start sliding it from one way to the other. If I slide it closer to the left side of the screen, I get more of the previous pose. If I slide it more to the other side, I get more of the second pose, right? Neither of these are a single click answer. They are a starting point. Get from here to here to here. Oh, then after I've gotten this breakdown pose, my job is to make this better. And so then I can, if I want to make it see my keys leading with his chest, I can start to adjust that. Maybe start leading with the head, reach with the arm, right? So all of the rules of crafting a appealing pose still stand. We have this tool that gets us a little bit of a closer starting point. So I want to add just a little bit of a dip in that. There we go. Now it's important to notice that even after this, we can borrow certain keyframes just from individual parts. Like if I want this foot to be much closer to that second frame, I can just grab the foot and sort of find a spot there and start getting a better pose out of it. Now it's going to start feeling like the foot leads it. The tool that Parker was talking about that is not free, that does something similar, is called Animbot. It was free for a long time. Dude, the internet's slow. It was free for a long time.
Is that what you were using? It's not the same thing?
It is. No, this is a different set of tools. This one is about $100 a year.
And he just started charging for this past year.
Yeah, well, it was in beta before, so basically he was letting people beta test it. There's another version called A-Tools, I think, that was his older version, and I think that those are still free. There's a 30-day trial on this. I'm not saying go buy it. I'm saying I will never not own it. Like it is the best set of tools I've ever seen for Maya.
Now he's rich.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think now this is his new job. Like I don't think he's like rich, but like I think today is the last day to get it at $9 too. I think that the price goes up relatively soon. But the Eco version is cheaper. He also sells it by the week. If you're a freelancer and you only need it every so many weeks, it's like $5 a week. So anyway, it's a good set of tools. I'm not saying go buy it. It's just got that plus a bunch more. And I just bought a year's worth and left that card checked to resubscribe it. So any questions on any of this? Any concerns? So, y'all want to watch some of your animations? Woo! Yeah! No, Brent's saying no. We don't have to. Brianna's saying yes. No, I really did enjoy this though. I'm sorry I'm a little way behind on getting people feedback on it. Please make sure that you've given feedback to everybody in your group. People may be replying a little late and stuff like that, so check back in over the next few days here. How many of you actually went and gave feedback to more than just the people in your group? Anybody? Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? I like it.
So is there a deadline on this?
On doing the reviews?
Yeah, because I did the other day, but
it was before today's class. But it's all right. If you're running a little late, there was a lot of issues with this. So Brianna, where's yours?
So
I thought that's what you said. You wanted to.
Whenever you have this.
I wasn't paying attention.
That was mind game stuff.
I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, like if you can hear the end.
Why do you do this to?
We don't have to. You all said you wanted to. I was prepared to give you work time.
Do it, Greg. Let's do it.
What are we doing?
Brianna rhymes with this. Choose me first.
No, there you go.
I thought it not.
Oh, that's cool.
The camera angle's off right there. I just didn't have time to fix it. It won't look like that at the end.
Oh no, I'm liking this though. I like what y'all are getting with these. This is the really good feedback. This stuff right here. I love this. Right, when people are able to go in there. So the comments are great. Being able to type comments are great. But having a couple of little sketches in there that help, they really do help. Something I was noticing periodically, I can't really draw on it until it's on this screen. But I noticed a lot of reversals that needed to happen or could improve it. So you have this curve here and the line of action, If we go back to here, having the opposite curve in your line of action means you'll get a reversal, right? So if you have this curve a little bit more in your line of action, it goes from that curve to that curve.
Contrast.
And you get that contrast in there, and it's going to make your spine feel much more loose. So, yeah, gosh, Parker. So yeah, these are cool. I like the camera angle stuff you got going on too, though. All right. I got you like perfectly flat on there.
Well, I figured because if I have time, I kind of want to use another program to do some water simulation. That's just for.
You could probably pull it off with Boss just to get a little bit of like a ripple in there. I mean, it's not going to be as good, but if you just want it to not feel like concrete,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, what I plan on doing is like try to like have it go through, maybe slowly rise up in that position.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's more of like a belly flow.
Like he
Like I said, I
died.
had a time crunch, so those last couple ones were just like he's there.
Okay, before
Oh,
you.
okay.
So mine, I have, two people in the scene, but it was breaking for like Anna figure thing when I had them both in the same scene.
Okay.
So I'm trying to animate them in separate scenes. And then I'm gonna have my mimic, because like you'll see, Lisa, like, you need, camera movements, but I'm gonna have that. Once I put them in the same scene, I'm gonna import them in, and I'm gonna get it, like, working.
Alright. So it's 580. You paying with cash or card? I pay part in cash and part in card. Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it declined. It should be at least $5 on that. Let me use a different card. Oh no, your card is fine. Huh? Your money declined. But it's cash. Your money's not good here. Alright. So it's 580. You paying with cash or card? I pay part in cash and part in card. Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it declined. It should be at least $5 on that. Let me use a different card. Oh no, your card is fine. Huh? Your money declined. But it's cash. Your money's not good here.
Really makes sense.
What is it? What's that from?
Remember last time I was in this class and I was gonna use this clip?
I
but
do.
I didn't because it was too long. Well, I'm using this clip.
Okay, fair enough. What's this? You got another one.
Yeah, that's the owner.
Oh, okay.
And I have more.
Alright. Yeah, so it's 580. Will you be paying with cash or card? Can I pay part in cash and part in card? Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it declined. It should be at least $5 on that. Let me use a different card. Oh no, your card is fine. Huh? Your money declined. But it's cash. Your money's not good here. It's not good here. I can't use another card. Ooh, don't make me punch you in your face. Get out of my store. Get out of my store.
You've added more to the, how long is it total?
I know what I think about it.
That's all right. Animate, remember you also have the thesis to do when they grab it. I think this will be like a two-part piece there, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. I like it. What's the rig?
Malcolm Ray.
Is it Malcolm? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just edited it.
Are both of them are Malcolm?
I just filled up.
I like the jacket.
So it's kind of going through the clothes. I don't know. But I feel like I'm just gonna, once I get it all working, I'm gonna go through and like kind of see if stealing some parts of it, fix that.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't worry about that parts yet. That's like almost a render thing. Like if it goes through the clothes, like if you can't figure out an easy way to fix it, you just correct and blend shape it and just like, fix that. That's cool. I like it. This is fun. Anyway, I'm really digging this feedback. Anybody want to look at another one? Anybody else?
Yeah, let's look at everyone's because I think that's important. So let's just put out the list.
Is there a way to post it
Yeah, I guess. He's just wanting to look at them. Well, I don't want to throw anybody up there if they're not willing to check it out. What were you saying?
I'm sorry. Is there a way to post your link without posting the entire
That's a good question. So we get all these like replies that are enormous. If you hit reply, just hit Control A and backspace,
Oh,
and that gets rid of all that other stuff from the original post,
duh.
and they'll get like way cleaner posts that way.
Just to, like, why don't they, like, is that in the...
It's because it's D2L.
It sucks. Like, Ryan's already on top of it, but, like...
Yeah, Ryan's used a forum before.
I was, like, trying to figure out, like, there's gotta be some sort of code out there that you get to, like... overcome.
Parker's trying to download apps.
That's that.
It's the backspace button. All right, I'm gonna go